What's up, my people? It's VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. Once again, you are watching the Headspace, Africa's most poignant hip-hop channel. And today we're going outside of the continent. We had to catch the algorithms. One talking point that's been on everybody's head, almost painstakingly so, is the Billboard Top 50 Greatest Rapper list. And obviously an honorary tip to the fact that the hip-hop culture has celebrated 50 years, but also a little nudge to a conversation that we spoke about on the last episode. If you haven't checked that out, we did an episode about the Grammys where I asked the question of whether or not we are allowing the industry to define what hip-hop is for us, or redefine, or mystify, by categorizing it as music when it is a whole culture which encompasses b-boying, graffiti, and DJing. But when you hear and see hip-hop for the most part in commercial platforms, what you basically see is actually, technically, truthfully, rap music. But side note, this particular list, again, is a list that I feel is sensational for many different reasons, but ultimately I want to start with the history of something that's very important when we look at these kinds of conversations. The everyday person who consumes music is given this music by artists who are part of a larger marketing machine, and quite often than not, this machine includes record labels that are affiliated and are sometimes one and the same things as major advertising corporate companies that control the industry in ways that seek to understand how the culture and the grassroots can be translated into something that the monopoly can use. In other words, the experiences that we have, when I say we, I mean you and I and everybody on a day-to-day basis, are taken and are channeled into the kind of music that would relatively be popular, because artists fundamentally come from the environment, and when these talented artists are identified and funneled into the industry, something fundamentally interesting to look at happens. The artist finds themselves in a position where they are given graphs and charts of market analysis. So now, the question of the value of their music is put down to how much money their music can actually make. And the whole point of a company is to make the most profit. So historically, companies have encouraged, in many instances coerced, artists to move in alignment with musical styles that would reap the most profitability. So the history of music cannot be separated from this very political decision that happens when artists are shifted into free thinking expressionists and transformed into caged tastemakers for a certain demographic. And more often than not, what the label, what the company will want is to attend to the largest demographic possible. Now, when it comes to the history of quote-unquote black art and black music, in America, the racial hotspot was always something that black people found themselves in a position where if it wasn't their creative capacity that was going to allow them to kind of navigate through the debilitating psychological experience of racism, then it was going to be spirituality. And quite often than not, these two intertwined. And it's bigger than just gospel music, but the fact is that art is a deeply spiritual thing. It's things that people do to get into a place where they're able to escape, transcend the very limiting dimensions of their lives. So I want to take y'all to a time where black artists were making all kinds of innovative musical art forms as a way to express their own inner alchemy and ease their pain into something spiritually liberating for them. And hence we have the birth of the spirituals, gospel music, we have the birth of the blues, we have the birth of bebop, jazz, and all of this music became an undeniable reckoning force which shifted the cultural landscape of America. And I mean, every person, even those who were in the context of whiteness, could not help but consume this music. And there begins the problem. How do white people subject blacks as nothing but labor and yet still find a way to appreciate their art and make money out of it? So when Billboard was established, it was established as an entity which sought to categorize black music in archetypes that could still channel it into radio, allow the music to be played, make artists perform in certain sectors of the country where they were allowed to even bear their faces, while at the very same time allowing white record executives to cash in on the very same music whose people they're oppressing. And now I'm mentioning this history because the fundamental objective of things like the Billboard chart are simply to cash in on culture. So when we're looking at a Billboard 50 greatest rappers list, we're not looking at the Billboard 50 greatest rappers who have made the most impact to their communities. We're not looking at 50 greatest rappers who have made the most impact on a cultural level even. We're looking at the 50 greatest rappers that have made the most money. This is just being honest. We're looking at the 50 greatest rappers that have been able to navigate pop culture in ways that were appealing to a mass demographic. So it's no surprise that Jay-Z is the #1 in this 50th greatest rappers list. And I know the question you're going to ask me, VJ, how are these two different? How is a rapper that appeals to most people not the rapper who's really making the most cultural impact? It's easy to answer. Tupac Shakur never won a Grammy. Ask yourself why. Because in order to navigate America in ways that are empowering to your people, you're going to have to be forced to play into the tropes of blackness that they want you to neatly fit into. So as much as Jay-Z has been emboldened into this embodiment of black excellence, that is only because for the most part of his life, he's been telling us stories of being a successful drug dealer turned businessman. And these stories still keep the same narrative. They tell us that it is impossible as a black person to navigate outside of this white supremacy structure without doing something shady and something that to a very direct level is going to destroy your own people. See, this is the catch-22 when we go into this dimension of talking about artists like a Jay-Z, is that for everything he's achieved it on the backs of all of those people who he has destroyed, either personally as a drug dealer or through these narratives which still give the impression that the street life, when navigated, is the most fruitful way to try and reach the top of the food chain. Now, I want to conscientize us about this because the politics of what hip-hop has become cannot be separated from the fact that rap music was taken from a larger culture. And if you look at the rappers that are most celebrated, they are rappers who felt the need to tell their own stories, which were stories quite often than not of being formerly in the street life, banging, in the game, thugging, mahuzu. Now, what this does is that it puts these rappers in a position where they question their own political significance and how they can empower their own people. And quite often than not, when you try to move into a direction that's overtly political and tries to empower the very same people who whiteness traps into this field of annihilation, this field of blackness where you don't exist other than as a tool of labor, it is hard to do that and be rewarded, because the people at the top are white, are often male, and are there not to present you in a light that's going to break the same system that they work through. You have to fit very neatly into what white, monopoly, capitalistic, imperialistic agendas want you to be. So the Billboard list is yet another example of the kind of rappers that are celebrated. There's different rappers on that list. You have Chuck D and Public Enemy, you have Ludacris, you have Rick Ross, you have Eminem, you have Busta Rhymes. Basically every rapper that's navigated into pop culture enough to keep on recycling and a steady amount of hit records, which in the 50s, 60s, 90s to early 2000s were really about the impact artists make on radio, which in and of itself was a platform that was regulated. You had to be a certain kind of artist to have a radio single. Your subject matter, your musical style had to fit into neat little margins that were created by whiteness. So if we understand that the bulk of the artists that are on this list did not achieve this level of success on their own terms and conditions, but they had to play into this political ideology of whiteness, then we understand why we could never fully be happy with a Billboard's list. This is not the list of the people. This is the list that the people were given, which represents the very narrow channel of artists which were chosen to be filtered into radio, and as a result became successful hit makers. Now, I'm not going to go into the list in and of itself. I'm going to say there's probably the question of, well, what about the so-called conscious rappers? Kendrick is number 2 on that list. I mentioned that Chuck D. And almost every rapper on that list has at some point tried to make music which directly addresses the ills of their community. But see, that's where the interesting thing is. Capitalism is so insidious that it makes room for quote-unquote revolutionary music whenever it is needed. And this music isn't even revolutionary. This music might be incendiary, it might be reactive, it might be rebellious, but the one thing that it isn't is revolutionary. Because what revolution is an attempt to break the system from its foundations and establish new principles. What Kendrick Lamar did with To Pimp a Butterfly was cashing in on the nostalgia of political black rebellion. So it's like a child that cries from the top of their lungs but never truly receives what they need. There's a place for music that represents that cry. There's a place for music that represents the tears of black folk. And that's why in the history of music, whether you're talking jazz or funk or soul or reggae, there's always going to be artists whose music might have spoken words of crying for freedom into our hearts. Bob Marley is a successful artist. Tupac Shakur, though he never won a Grammy, was also a successful artist. Because you can't deny the fact that people will want to know how freedom can be possible. But the one thing that the system will never do is allow an artist who lives the principles of freedom outside of their lives and literally tries to engage in active insurrection, active separation from capitalism to thrive. What I mean by active separation, we're talking about artists who understand that when you are successful artists, plowing your money into solidarity economies, that give people the three fundamental things that capitalism takes away from them: land, culture, and unity. Name me a rapper that has, outside of their lives, tried to engineer these three things in ways that were tangible, where they take the money that they make from all of these Billboard what's and try to buy land to use it on behalf of empowering black culture to create unity. This is revolution. And this is where a Kendrick Lamar or a J. Cole or a Common, all of the artists on this list have fallen null. So this is where we understand that rappers are not revolutionaries.
Yeah, because they do buy land, but they buy land for their own
personal gain. They buy land where they build mansions, where they do every single thing on this earth other than try to create market economies that prioritize the people that are limited by capitalism.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm essentially trying to spark an engagement on with you, our subscribers, whether you are in Africa, as we are based on this continent, or are an African in the diaspora. We, when I say we, I'm talking about black people in particular, people of color in general, and just oppressed people all over the world, because oppression is something all people feel to a certain extent. But there is an undeniable historical design where people of a darker hue who historically come from the lands which are now called Africa and Asia have been oppressed in ways that were more designed and engineered. It's one thing for communities to come in and for war to be established on your land, but it's another for your people to be taken, for your people to be brainwashed, for culture to be literally wiped out from their imagination. So we're talking about institutionalized oppression. We're talking about the kind of institutionalized oppression that gave birth to slavery, that was being run by the engine of colonialism, which still lives today in 2023 through these very same companies and businesses we still feel are the only doors to our success. The Grammys are a colonial company. Billboard is a colonial company. The whole system is colonial. It's built against us. This is the worst possible situation for anybody considered black to be in. This is what is termed Afro-pessimism. Why? Because the African or the oppressed person finds themselves in the pessimism, the worst possible condition. So when you are in that condition, where you are invisible, you try to find out how to navigate within something that's built for your own death, for your constant demise. So really, what freedom is not the pursuit of trying to live. It's trying to postpone this. It's trying to postpone this constant death that's put on us as people of black bodies. Now, political jargon and everything else aside, what it basically means is we live in a world where if you're a certain kind of skin tone and you come from a certain land, whether historically or directly in your everyday reality, we live in a world where your success has been completely eliminated. And that the only time you will elevate up to places where capitalism acknowledges you is if you play against your own power. It's a deep conversation, but I just wanted to ignite. And I wanted to remind us that these are not our lists.
Yeah.
These are not our companies. But these are our artists. These are our people. This is our culture. And if hip-hop is going to be something that truly empowers us going into the years forward, if this future with all of the progressive technologies, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, if all of this is going to become something where we can use to actively instigate the closest thing to freedom and revolution for ourselves, we're going to have to be very conscious of how to use these three things to our advantage. Take whatever capitalism is giving us and establish aspects where our land can be used for the power of cultural empowerment and black unity. My name is Viwe, the brother from the ancient mother. Talk to me in the comment section. I don't want to do an episode on the list because we've spoken about lists. There's a link in the description where we talk about the importance of lists in hip-hop, particularly in rap music. We've done that before. We've spoken a dozen times about the fact that they are measures of excellence. So if you're talking about greatest rapper, what is your standard? So I didn't want to talk about this because it's obviously a standard based on commercial sales. What I wanted to talk about is Billboard in and of itself. I want to talk about these companies. I want to talk about these names, the history of them. Do some more research, find out, because if we don't educate ourselves about what's around us, then we're bound to repeat the same mistakes. It's all love. The Headspace is all about instigating a possible revolution in Africa for hip-hop, for all those who love it. This is the part where I lift up my fist, maybe open up my hand and say, Israel too. All I'm saying is, if the world is going to be ours, like Nas said, because hip-hop through rap has given us so many affirmations of taking over, of self-empowerment, and yet what these become are just jargons for individual wealth. So what do we truly mean when we say the world is ours, the world is yours? Do you mean you just want another slice of that capitalist pie, or do you really want to do something that changes the DNA of the economic, socio-economic structure as we know it? Talk to me in the comment section, please, please, please.